Sports with Sean Caravilles.
Well, it was a sensational day in the Tour de France as Romain Bardet took the stage honours on the uphill finish as Chris Froome lost his yellow jersey to Fabio Aru. Here's BBC 5 Live.
The Tour de France.
Welcome to Bespoke at the Tour de France. I'm OJ Borge. My current location, about 50 metres up from the line in Peyragudes. I'm stood on a runway. That is what the riders are finishing on today. Beautiful black tarmac. It's actually an aerodrome where today's stage finishes. The final climb, 16%. That is what the riders have got to get up to get over the finish line. So with that in mind, let's find out what happened at the end of today's stage.
200 metres to go. Martin's not going to close the gap. Romain Bardet's trying hard to do it. Aru looks behind. Rigoberto Urán is there. Bardet is there. Bennett's being left behind. Simon Yates can't hold the wheels here. Froome's just about hanging on, but he's not going to win the stage. Aru's really hurting. His face a mask of pain. Bardet comes to the front once again. It's Aru and Bardet, and Rigoberto Urán is right there as well. But Chris Froome's just losing a couple of seconds here, possibly. The French are getting excited. Romain Bardet, second overall in the Tour de France last year, comes to the front. He's just about to come over the top of the hill. He can see the line in front of him. He's being chased up towards the line. I'm not sure whether he's going to be caught though. Bardet looks behind. Bardet takes the win. He even has time to smile as he crosses the line. Rigoberto Urán, I think, took Aru for second place on the line. Lando was in fourth place for Sky. Meintjes Fit overcomes Dan Martin. Chris Froome didn't have the legs to go in that sprint there. Froome still hasn't crossed the line yet. Here comes Chris Froome now, his tongue hanging out. Froome's lost a few seconds here. Froome crosses the line 21 seconds behind the front of the stage. The yellow jersey may have gone from the shoulders of Chris Froome here. He might have lost it by a couple of seconds to Fabio Aru. What drama at the end of this stage, and it all came down to the final 300 metres of the race.
It was another dramatic day in the Tour de France. Chris Froome has lost the yellow jersey. A fabulous French winner of the stage moves himself up. Romain Bardet does in the standings. But first, let me update you where we are, because you could be watching this live on Facebook or listening to it. Earlier on, it was beautiful. We're in the Pyrenees, in Peyragudes. It was blue skies. Now, it feels like we're in Mordor. The mist has come down. It's cold. It's wet. We've had to put up this awning that we've dragged all the way from the UK. It's not the same place as it was before, but that is the Pyrenees for you. And I don't have my usual two people with me. I don't have Rob Hales and Simon Brotherton. They were evacuated with all the other commentators. They had a police escort and everything. Instead, I have a gaggle of journalists who are lurking around the press centre. They are Jeremy Whittle, journalist and author. Good evening, Jeremy.
Hello.
Also Sophie Smith, who's a journalist.
Hello.
And also Ed Pickering, editor of Pro Cycling.
Hello.
You all look fabulous. Thank you for joining this evening. In fact, if we got closer, this could be a scrum, a press scrum.
That'd be cosier.
It would be. Jeremy, first off, talk me through today's stage, because I don't think anyone saw coming what happened in the end.
No, and really not an awful lot did happen until we got to this murderously steep ramp at the finish, which is just across the hillside from us, which was kind of almost like just a power climb. Wasn't the kind of climb that you normally associate with the Tour. It's more like a climb from one of the classics races in the spring, where, you know, in Belgium, where they have these very steep hills. And so Team Sky took Chris Froome to the bottom of that climb, and you'd have expected that he'd have performed pretty well. But Fabio Aru and Romain Bardet had a dig. They put in an attack to see what happened, and it worked pretty well, because Froome was really found wanting. You could see he was really struggling on the hill, because he tried to follow them and to get out of the saddle on his bike, and every time he did, he didn't have the power to do so, and he slammed back into the saddle, had to sit down again. So physically he looked pretty fatigued, and it was interesting because it was the only real attack of the day that he faced, and they took more than 20 seconds out of him. So there was a complete reversal in terms of, you know, the overall standings, because Fabio Aru now has the yellow jersey. Romain Bardet has made up a reasonable amount of time, and it's all to play for.
Sophie, obviously not from a British perspective, but the Tour de France needed this, didn't it?
I think so. Even just from today, when Contador attacked, there was an applause from the press room. And there was an applause when Aru made his move, and that was really smart.
It woke everyone up, didn't it?
Kind of just sat on. People seemed to get excited, and then there was a moving rugby mall outside of the Sky bus, obviously, because I think people just wanted a different chapter, and not this. There is the possibility of the yellow jersey being in the one team with the one tactic the entire way to Paris.
Because they have. I mean, we were talking about this yesterday. Rob and Simon were both saying Team Sky have had an easy ride of it so far.
But it's not true to say it's an easy ride, but they're so strong, the team as a unit, that it's been made to look easy. They've controlled the race. They've faced relatively few attacks, and they've, a measure of their strength is that, over the penultimate climb today, out of the front group of 11, there are only 11 riders left out of the whole of the Tour de France, arguably the 11 strongest riders in the race and therefore in the world, and 3 of them were from Team Sky. They were the only team with more than one rider up there, so they looked incredibly strong, and as Jeremy said, it looked like we're in for the same for the rest of the race all the way to Paris. And I must admit, I wasn't really looking forward to it, but in the last 200 metres it seems everything's changed.
Well, you had a great line earlier on. What was your great line?
I was saying that the last 200 metres is the first time I've looked forward to the rest of the Tour de France for the whole of the race so far, because although it's the Tour de France, so I enjoy it, but Team Sky went into the yellow jersey on the first stage with Geraint Thomas. Chris Froome took it over, and it looked, on the evidence of previous years, that the tactic would be to keep that all the way to Paris with the strong team and the strongest rider in the race. Now, I would say they've got the strongest team still, but they don't have the strongest rider.
That's the interesting bit, is that he was weak today, and he just didn't have it. And he said so outside the bus. He just said, I didn't have it. His sports director kind of tried to cover for him a bit and said, oh, maybe it was timing. But we were speaking about this off record or behind the scenes before, that even on the way to Chambéry, whenever that was on Sunday, he kind of couldn't match people in the sprints.
But it is interesting as well, because everybody was writing these stories at the first press conference in Dusseldorf, which seems like 100 years ago now. We were talking about them being vulnerable. Dave Brailsford was very quick to kind of jump on that after the time trial, because Geraint Thomas took the yellow jersey and Froome rode so well, and everybody else struggled, or they lost a significant chunk of time. But that time's almost gone now. If you think of Bardet and Aru and their performances in that time trial, that time's erased now. So the kind of race begins now, and I think Froome, unfortunately for the Team Sky fans and for people who really champion him, I think he's looking quite vulnerable. And it'd be interesting, tomorrow's stage, which is brutal, it's very short, but it'll be really aggressive, very fast. Be interesting to see how he recovers from this afternoon.
Yeah, because the other point is that Froome not only doesn't look like the strongest rider in the race, he doesn't look like the strongest rider on his team, because Mikel Landa dropped him at the end. After doing a lot of work, Mikel Landa was strong enough to go with the final sprint and attacks on the final climb. Froome wasn't. So Froome looks weaker than his own teammate.
Well, there's two ways of looking at that, because some people, there was a bit of footage that was knocking around from Spanish TV that there was an argument, wasn't there, afterwards between Mikel Landa and his director sportif.
Yeah, that's sort of been doing the rounds on social media.
Yes,
they didn't answer questions. There wasn't much time for
because there was two ways of looking at it. Was it the fact that Mikel Landa attacked and dropped Froome and left him? I saw it, because there's time bonuses this year at the Tour de France, I saw it that Mikel Landa was trying to go up and beat Aru and Romain Bardet to try and stop them getting the time bonuses.
I'm not convinced about that, because I think on a finish like that that's so steep, you go as hard as you can up the climb, and there's no time to work out where Froome is. Landa arguably should have stayed with Froome, and maybe that's what Portal was berating him. Maybe that's a strong
it was very telling. We say in a prologue or a time trial that you can tell a lot from performance because it's an intense effort. That was an equally intense effort at the end of a very long stage through the mountains, and he was really found wanting. Now, okay, it could have been just a blip, and he'll be fine, but perhaps. But it could also be the end of the Froome era. That could be the first crack that we start to see in just a gradual kind of a decline. It's going to happen at some point.
It'd be poetic, because wasn't it this climb a few years ago where he misunderstood something from the Sky bus and took off on Bradley Wiggins?
The perfect irony, isn't it? That the spot where he waited for Wiggins, Landa rode away from him.
Are you seriously saying, though, that this could be it? This could be the start of the crumbling of the Froome era? Because we've only ever talked about him winning his fourth Tour de France, 3 on the bounce. He's looked so strong in previous years.
But I remember that happening with, I was there when Indurain cracked in 96 in the Tour in really bad weather, and Bjarne Riis won. It was a different era, there were different things going on. But it was still momentous because, he had this aura of invincibility, this incredibly strong team, and they were reduced to kind of like, doing this kind of thing of hanging around on the climbs, waiting for him to catch up, And for the leader himself, the whole team is there. They're purpose built to take him up the climbs as effectively as they can. For them to be kind of almost dawdling, looking over their shoulders, like, where is he? That's internally as well. I think in terms of team morale and structure, it's the beginning of the end, isn't it?
And also what we've got to remember is that in last year's Tour de France, Chris Froome was not climbing any better than some of his rivals like Bardet, Porte. He was their equal in the mountains. They all finished around the same time in the mountain. Froome actually made the difference in the time trials last year. This year, there's only one. There's only 2 time trials, one left, and it's quite a short one, which means that logically, the 2017 Tour should be decided in the mountains. If Froome wasn't climbing the best last year and certainly isn't climbing the best this year, then he's very vulnerable.
Well, we've talked about him. Let's hear from him. We managed to get partially into a scrum and hear from Chris Froome at his bus earlier on.
Yeah, certainly it's a tough day for me in the final. My teammates did such an amazing job today, but I didn't have the legs at the end to finish it off. Simple as that. No excuses. I just didn't have the legs on the final kick.
Tell us about the steep finish here.
Yeah, it's brutal. Ramps of over 20%. That's a really, really hard finish. I can only say congratulations to Romain Bardet for winning the stage, and also to Fabio Aru for taking the yellow jersey. Race is certainly on now.
And of course also an episode with the camper there.
Sorry?
The camper down in the street.
There was a bit of a tight turn at the bottom of the climb, and a couple of us just overshot the corner. Just had to go onto the grass and turn around and come back on.
And it was a crazy scrum around his bus of people wanting to speak to him at that point. Just as the mist started to roll in on us here at the top of Peyragudes and the Pyrenees, it actually started to get quite cold. Do you have any BBC branded knitwear we could get on?
Mitts, I need.
We've had a couple of comments coming in. Ben says he still has it. Mike, and this is an interesting point, he says, will it play into Team Sky's hands now they don't have to defend the yellow jersey, Sophie?
I think they'll still, the onus will still be on them to work. But I do agree with, was it Mike? Before that I don't think at the moment, I think it's too early to say, with all due respect to the esteemed gentleman behind me, that Froome's era is over. I think his greatest advantage coming was that he had the strongest team. So as we've said, he's probably not the strongest GC leader here, but he still has the strongest team. But he's been flat all season as well, I think you could argue.
Yeah.
But he's not raced all season, has he? He's not really raced this year.
Well, that's it, and that's what I am wondering, because he's had this train more, race less approach, if he's missing that top speed, or if it's something else, like he's ill, or everyone else is just catching up to him. So Sky did say that this course was different this year. It's shorter. They have to be more aggressive. And
the problem they've got now is that they've got, as you say, the strongest team in the race, and we've got the stage tomorrow, which we've talked about, which is brutal, and it's going to be really fast. And if the others want to kill him off, basically, and do more damage, then tomorrow's the day, because the climbs in the Alps will suit him. Even if he is struggling, they're kind of long train climbs, by which I mean, you can get your whole team massed out and they can keep a steady pace, and they're more easy to control than these climbs in the Pyrenees, which are much more jumpy.
Well, Fabio Aru has taken the yellow jersey off the shoulders of Chris Froome now. Do you think he's the main rival, Fabio Aru, to Chris Froome?
I'd put him and Romain Bardet on the same level. Aru's currently in the yellow jersey, but there's not much between them, and Bardet won the stage today, which suggests that he's certainly strong enough to match Aru. I think Aru has won a Grand Tour. Bardet's been second in the Tour de France. In terms of their results, there's not much to choose. They're not that far off each other in age. I think that I can't really choose between them. What I do think at the moment from here is that they both look a little bit stronger than Froome, but maybe not necessarily than Mikel Landa.
Do you think that's the last time that Team Sky will see that yellow jersey this Tour de France?
That's a really big call, isn't it? Because you just associate them with having, and I think they've almost got used to it as well. But the interesting thing is now is the others will believe. Now, I think that's a big thing. They wouldn't have believed they could beat him before, and so much of cycling, even though it's an endurance sport, is about how much you're prepared to suffer. Now, if you think you can win, you're prepared to suffer more, perhaps, than if you think, well, I can get on the podium. If they actually think they can win the Tour de France, that's a different prospect.
Jeremy's right, because over the stage over the Mont des Chats into Chambéry, when Bardet had attacked there and went away, the others worked with Froome. It was almost as if they were defending their own position instead of trying to put pressure on him as the race leader. At that point, I think they still felt they were racing for second place, or saw Froome and Sky as being, in the same position as previous years, i.e. invincible. I think today, as Jeremy said, we'll give them belief that they're stronger than him, and now they can start to think about how they can put him under pressure and go out and try to win the race themselves rather than trying to work off him and his team.
And then it becomes attacking, doesn't it? Because we've shown today, and actually into Chambéry, that he can't really match some of these guys one-on-one. We're with a team, and if they put everyone on the front, then fine. But if it comes down to single attacks and they're all on the road one-on-one.
Which is interesting, because for the past couple of years we've been talking about Chris Froome as the best bike racer in the world, the best climber in the world.
Well, I think he's become an incredibly accomplished bike rider. I mean, I wrote a story the other day saying that the idea that he would now be called, his nickname used to be Crash Froome because of the frequency of his spills and tumbles, and also because there's famously this incident where he rode the World Championships and fell off the start ramp, or he bumped into a commissaire, rode off the start ramp into an official. So he's had these humiliating, embarrassing incidents. Then today it was bizarre, because I was thinking, well, that period's gone, and today he followed wheels into a camper van on a roundabout.
Well, that was,
I looked at that again on the slow motion, and you could see on the replay, you could see that the corner was really greasy, and they just came into it too fast, and they had to just go straight on rather than try and take it.
Well, there's a new way to get in touch with your fans, isn't it? Try and ride into the camper van for a barbecue. There was a great tweet actually from Michael Hutchinson, who said the new unwritten rule is don't attack the yellow jersey when he's having a barbecue, which is the new unwritten rule. Well, let's talk about another British man who had quite an interesting day, and that's Steve Cummings, who's won stages at the Tour de France, always with thrilling breakaways. Once before he won a stage onto an airfield. Today could have been his day, Ed.
It could, and it's kind of a shame from a British fan's standpoint that Sky kept such a tight leash on the break today, because Cummings clearly was the strongest in the break. Not only the strongest, he's got a sense of timing and sensitivity to the way other people are riding that means that he just knows how to win races. He wasn't the first to attack out that group. I think Thomas de Gent from the breakaway group attacked. Cummings didn't panic. He rode his own pace, and you could tell he knew he would come back, and he also knew he would go away from the other riders. I thought he was brilliant today, and it was a real shame that the yellow jersey battle kind of trampled on his parade a bit, because otherwise we'd have been looking at his third win in 3 tours.
He was really in agony though, wasn't he? I was watching pictures of him, and he was sweating, he was grimacing, he just didn't get far enough away.
Shut his eyes at one point. The thing about him I like as well is that if you talk to him, he spends more time studying the road book than any other rider I've talked to. So he will always almost dismiss 80% of the tour as stuff I've just got to get through, and then he'll pinpoint 2 days where those are Steve Cummings days, and he's done it very successfully, but then he's always been quite an underrated rider. I think he's found his kind of niche now, hasn't he?
Well, we did actually manage to talk to him, Steve Cummings. He was speaking to Gemma Sturber.
Steve, that was one hell of an effort. You couldn't have given any more, could you?
Exactly, couldn't give any more. It's just a shame we didn't get a bit more of an advantage, I was hoping for a bit more of an advantage.
Have you got enough in your legs to give it another go another day, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I just need to feed well now and eat as much as I can, because I used a lot of energy today, and then hopefully in a few days I'll be alright again.
What was going through your head when you realised they were catching you?
I just try and go full until the point where you realise it's not going to happen, and then save as much energy for try again in a few days. But yeah, it's a good try, but ideally you want to win. But
Steve Cummings there speaking to the BBC's Gemma Sturber. So, if you said there's 2 stages that he looks at that he thinks he can win on, which stage do you think he'll go again?
I think Rodez and Le Puy, the stages in the Massif Central, are made for Steve Cummings. They're lumpy. There probably won't this time be a chase from the peloton, because the sprinters won't be there to contest the finish, and the GC riders will probably be happy to allow the battle to wait till the Alps, barring maybe last minute flurries on those stages, although I would love it if that wasn't the case and the GC battle did kick off. But those 2 stages, they're perfect for him. I don't think he'll go for it on both of them. He'll pick one and make the break, and as he's shown in the past, when he makes the break, it's the right break, and he's often the rider who can best master the circumstances and tactics to win himself.
Well, we spent a lot of this podcast and this show talking about tomorrow's stage and how exciting the racing is going to be. So let's talk about how exciting tomorrow can be. Stage 13, Saint-Girons-de-Foix. There is a big old climb in it, Jeremy, where there's the possibility of attacks again.
Yeah, there's 3, but then the final one, the Mur de Peyragudes, excusez-moi, is, I think, particularly brutal. It's 19% sections.
Yeah, it's steep, very steep. The last 3k are very, very steep.
Yeah, it's notorious, and everybody's very excited about it. I mean, but we've had that before, notorious and very excited, and then things haven't played out because there's been a tactical, stalemate. But you'd like to see everyone attacking. And to see what comes out of that, and I think they will. They definitely have to, because they don't have many more opportunities. If Froome is on the rack physically in any way, I mean, he was this afternoon in that short burst, but that wasn't enough to tell for sure. But if he's on the rack in terms of his health, then he'll be found out tomorrow, I think.
It's going to be an exciting listen. You can hear all of that 2:30 on the BBC Sport website with Rob and Simon after they've had a lovely sleep because they got away from this stage earlier as we're stuck up a mountain. Now, there was a lot of riders here, there was a lot of press and media here, but this wasn't the only mountain in France that had an interesting day going on. And Jeremy, you've written a book about Mont Ventoux.
Yes.
Today is the 50th anniversary of Tommy Simpson's death. For people who don't know who Tommy Simpson is, who was he?
Tom Simpson was a British rider who pursued success in the Tour de France in the late 50s and early 1960s. He became the leader of the Peugeot team, which is a very big sponsor in French cycling at the time, and then he became the world road race champion. He was a BBC Sports Personality of the Year, very successful rider on the continent, kind of an adopted Frenchman, and had homes in Belgium and in Corsica. And in 1967 there was a Ventoux stage on the Tour, and he'd been very ill. He'd been sick for 2 or 3 days before they got to the Ventoux, and really should probably have quit, but he didn't quit, and he was riding for the British team because that year's tour was run under British national team, on a national team basis. So he was in a slightly weaker team than he would have been if he'd been with his Peugeot team. Anyway, he got to the Ventoux, and it was a baking hot day, 43 degrees, and he collapsed twice towards the summit, very close to the summit in fact, and died on the mountain. And afterwards there were, apart from being ill, there were also amphetamines were found in his luggage, and there was a very prevalent culture of amphetamines at the time. So amphetamines have always been linked to his death, but I'd argue that there were other contributing factors as well. But anyway, that's the Tom Simpson legend or story, or the tragedy rather.
The ballad.
Yeah, it's the ballad. Yeah, it's more of a tragedy, I suppose, than anything else. And today was the 50th anniversary. So Joanne Simpson, his daughter, led a ride, and I think Bradley Wiggins was there as well. Eddie Merckx, people like that, and also friends and family. Lesser lights from cycling, just rode up the Ventoux, paid their respects at the mountain. I think quite a lot of other people joined them as well. Laid flowers, and I think that then they went and had a big lunch.
So the question is then, why is the Tour de France not going up the Ventoux this year? They went up last year.
Well, they don't. I've asked them about that, and they say Christian Prudhomme, is the director of the race, says that the Ventoux should be used rarely because it's so extreme. And in a way, he's got a point, because there's always drama on the Ventoux. We saw last year, Chris Froome ended up running. The last time before that we went up, we had a lot of controversy about his ride. Then there's various other incidents through history, including the Simpson episode. So they use it rarely, partly also because of logistics, but I think they didn't want to go this year, and they deliberately went last year because they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to mark the anniversary of a rider who died in their race, riding uphill, potentially because of an excess of doping. I mean, obviously he had experience of amphetamines. Whether amphetamines killed him or not is another conversation, but I think it was too awkward. They fudged it because they didn't know what they should do, so they didn't do anything.
Do you think it was disrespectful of the Tour not to go?
It's not exactly disrespectful, but it's a shame that it's seen as something not really to talk about in this year's race. It's the great unmentionable, whereas I saw Richard Virenque, a guy who was up to his neck in the Festina scandal in 1998, swanning around the Tour village the other day, celebrated and a guest of the race. So disrespectful may be a bit strong, but I feel that they normally are very quick to mark anniversaries, and they've built their race on the foundation of its history and culture, and they've suddenly ignored one of the most notable incidents in its history.
And it was a pivotal moment as well, because doping controls had just been introduced a couple of years before that, and it was seen, it is still regarded by many people who you talk to in cycling as a wake-up call, where we need to have a greater duty of care for the riders. Now, it's very arguable whether that's been achieved over the years, but it was a kind of Rubicon moment. And I think the bottom line is, people say, well, he did this and he did that, but he died in a bike race. He died in the Tour de France. Now, I don't think that should happen personally, regardless of the circumstances. So, I think that's in itself is worth marking, that moment.
Do you think it was marked well enough then by the riders who were there? As you said, Bradley Wiggins were there. Bradley Wiggins was being quoted today saying that Tom Simpson was the best and his inspiration, the best British cycling, his inspiration. Do you think it was marked well enough?
Well, it's, as I said, it's very difficult, isn't it? It's a very conflicting issue, because you talk to people who regard Tom Simpson. They lump Tom Simpson in with Lance Armstrong and a whole other era of doping, and you talk to people who regard him as a kind of he died for cycling, both of which are cliches, I think, both of which fail to recognise that he was a three-dimensional human being, a flawed human being. But as I say, the reality is that he died in the Tour de France, and I think that they should have done more than they did do, yeah.
Sports with Sean Caravilles.